guest is Shreya Prem. She is a senior experience designer at Electrolux in Sweden. And I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Sushant. So hi, everyone. I'm going to start with actually sharing my screen and then introduce myself. But thanks a lot for joining. And yeah, as Sushant said, questions, keep them for the end. But yeah, do make sure you capture your thoughts or any questions you may have. And if you're too shy to write here as well, you can write to me later. That's not a problem at all. So hopefully you can all see my screen.
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so hi. And since I'm going to be talking for the next 20 to 30 minutes, I think it's nice if you get to know me a little bit better than just my name. So who am I? And I think this is the trickiest part for me as always. I think as designers, it's always easier to understand what I do, and it's easier for me to explain to designers. But I think I always struggle with explaining what I do, who I am. In short, of course, I am an experienced designer, but I think I've gradually started to formulate who I am. So I'm a people and planet-centered experience designer. I definitely emphasize that on that quite a bit, because I don't just do user experience, but I really work closely with people and planet. I am extremely passionate about designing for a sustainable future. That's where I found my drive 3 to 4 years ago. And I don't think I can work on projects or with companies which don't have that approach, but I still remain very human-centered. I work across physical, digital products and services, so I'm not stuck to a certain product. And I have 5 years industry experience, 10 years design experience, with the education, and a lot more experience with just life that I try to put into my design when possible. My journey so far, I was born in India, moved around a lot, but that's where I was born and raised. I did my graduation in school with commerce with maths. And the only reason I brought that up was to show that you don't always have to have a background with engineering, arts to get into design. But of course, I did have a creative itch, which is what led me to pursuing design. And that's why I'm still doing that. And I did my master's in ISD Rubika in India. I'm sure some of you are familiar of that college, and some of you are actually maybe from that university as well. And my degree was in product design management, but basically focused on industrial design. And I was through my college, I think my biggest focus was really designing for simplicity. That's what really gave me the drive. It was really about how we can design for making the everyday life nicer for people and easier. And that's what drove me to my 4th year internship, which was at Keshwa, which is a brand by Decathlon. And I was also really interested in the mountains and hiking and trekking. So I did a short internship there, which was really nice. Came back to college and then did my final year internship at Electrolux. And since then, I have been at Electrolux for the past 4.5, 5 years. And for those of you who might not know what Electrolux is, it's a global home appliance brand based in Sweden. So I am currently based in Stockholm. We have our biggest design office here. And again, it's not like I started off with, really wanting to work with home appliances or anything. But like I said before, I always had the drive to make the everyday simple. But then also what's kept me at Electrolux is really the mission that Electrolux is on, which is to shape living for the better. And sustainability being one of the biggest goals that we have and we actively try to work on. And that's what keeps me there. And I have transitioned quite a bit in my career as a designer. So as I said before as well, I think that's what makes it tricky for me to explain what I do, because I started off as an industrial designer and I was really focused on the physical products. And of course, it was really fun. I still remember the first project I did at Electrolux. It was very physical. We spoke with my constant conversations were actually with R&D, trying to figure out draft angles. They said a straight lid's not going to work. We worked at how we make a simple little lid happen on a box. But I think being on that project, even though it was really fun, it made me realize that I really enjoy when I work more holistic. And that's why I moved more into experience design and I work holistically across hardware, software, services, but really looking at the full experience. And in the recent years, I've also moved more towards experience strategy. So really looking at the future experiences, which at least within Electrolux, when we look at these strategy projects, we design the vision for 5 to 10 years from now. And then all the projects within the company are driven by that vision. And one of the examples for that, again, I don't know if anyone has seen that. It's a Swedish company, Swedish project. But we released this project in Milan last year. And this is our vision for the future kitchen and the future sustainable eating kitchen, basically. So like I said, big drive from sustainability. And this is our vision project. And now this drives the different projects within the company. And like I said before as well, my approach remains very people and planet centered. And why I specify that separately is because they're not always the same, right? So again, in the design industry as well, we've been very used to being user centered. We adapted from that into human centered. Now there's a big conversation on humanity centered, which tries to take care of all of these different factors. And that is because, needs for people and the needs for planet are not always the same. And I bring up an example here. People like to wear new clothes. We like to be buying new things. We tend to buy fast fashion. It's cheap. There was this big trend on social media in between where people would not repeat their clothes just because it was not nice to wear the same clothes again. But if you look from the planet perspective, that's not really what we need, because people should be buying consciously and be more careful of their impact. And this is why I really try to combine those two. And that's what brings me to the topic of the conversation, which is designing for the irrational user in this messed up world. So I'm going to start talking a bit on the second part of the topic. And I don't think this needs a lot of introduction, so we'll go fastly on this, because we all know what's going around in the environment around us, right? It's pretty messed up at the moment, the situation. It's not just the climate, the political situation is messed up. Would you have imagined 2 years ago that we'd be living when there's a war happening right next door? Climate crisis, I don't need to say too much, honestly. It can be a massive conversation just explaining what's going wrong. But then also we're entering a massive economic crisis right now. Prices are rising, people are losing jobs. So this situation is pretty messed up. But of course, we can't solve everything. But I do believe when it comes to the climate crisis, we have a big role to play. And I don't want to be bleak. I don't want to be depressing, but it is true. And it's time for us to just own up. Time is running out. We've messed up our planet quite bad. And it does require action from governments, companies, but also people. Of course, big impact needs to be from the big giants, but that doesn't mean that people don't have a role to play here. I know a lot of times it can feel like, how much can I do? Of course, I don't need to use a straw, but is that really enough? Is that really creating any impact? But I'm going to just take a step back and remind you of COVID. When we were all locked in, we weren't going out 2 years, not taking flights, not driving around, maybe not shopping so much, eating consciously because you're staying home, money was tight, people lost jobs. Do you remember the impact that had on the climate around us? Suddenly, there were so many articles going around. The air is cleaner. We're seeing animals out and about on the streets in their natural habitats. And all of this was because of the actions that people had. And again, people didn't do this intentionally. They didn't go out thinking, okay, COVID's happened. I'm home. I'm going to be sustainable. Not really. It just happened to be a byproduct of people just not doing those actions. And this is why I bring up that there is a big role that people have to do. And there's massive opportunities in the behaviors that we can change for people. It's, what if people bought fewer clothes? That would have a positive impact. What if people wasted lesser food, composted, ate lesser meat, bought lesser one-time use plastics, and much more. I've just brought on very few examples here, but if you just sit, brainstorm for 15 minutes, you'll come up with so many different behaviors if we can impact, and we can actually have an impact on the planet positively. But people are people. And this is what brings me to the first part of the topic, which is the irrational user. But I do use user, human, person very interchangeably, because a lot of times we try to disassociate with the user. We always saying, oh, I'm working on this project, I have this user. We forget that the user is a person. A user is a human who is making decisions, and they are not rational. So again, I think this is also a big conversation happening in the industry in general as well, as to how, do we call it user? Do we call it person? I personally like to call it a person and a human, but I write here user just because it's familiar. And why? Sorry. I'm sure you've all seen this GIF somewhere here or there. And this is just that even though we have so many opportunities, we know there's so many behaviors we can actually impact. But even if we throw all the information on people, It doesn't mean people are going to change. And that isn't people's fault, really. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. I know I should be exercising. I know I should be, being sustainable, eating healthy, doing all of those things. But just having the information is not enough. And that is because there's so much information around me. There's so many different sources. I can't care about everything all the time. So I just want you all to reflect on this question. And I know we're not going to have so much of a conversation right now, but if you can just show it with a raise of hands, some emojis, maybe a like button, and tell me how many of you are trying to live a sustainable lifestyle in small actions, whatever you're trying to do. I see one hand go up. One more. Few more popping up. Nice. I think I can't see the full picture in any case, but I do see a lot of hands coming up, some thumbs ups going up, and I'm quite happy to see that, to be honest. Otherwise, I wouldn't say much, but sure. So on that note, now, you're saying you're trying to be sustainable. Now, I want you to just try to make a choice. So imagine you're buying a down jacket, so a poofy jacket, it's winter time, and you want to make a conscious purchase because you said you try to be sustainable and that's what you want to buy. Which one would you buy? I'm going to give you a few minutes. You don't have to give me your answer, but just try to decide for yourself. Which one would you go for? Okay, I don't know if you managed to make a decision. Maybe I'd like to ask if, one of you, maybe Sushant, you, since you have, the mic control, if you tell me if you managed to make a choice, how did you feel making a choice? If you don't want to answer, if someone on the chat wants to give an answer, it would be nice. So, yeah.
My thinking process is that the 100% seems a much bigger number, both for biomaterials as recyclable. So I'll choose either the cost or the market.
Mm-hmm.
That is also because I can potentially afford those. So price is at least, in the same bracket. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, people in the comments, please feel free to, just drop down what makes sense for you from what you see on the screen, because that's just me. Also,
Yeah.
I'm wearing a Uniqlo right now, but again, if this was the choice given to me, it'll be one of those 100% recycled.
Yeah. Thanks. I see there's one hand raised actually. I
Yeah,
don't know if that's, yeah.
Yeah, feel free to use the comment section. Don't have to explain the thinking. Maybe just like get the idea across. H&M, anybody? People would be so afraid to just say like, I want to wear H&M. I
And
have a
that's
bunch of
part of,
H&M.
yeah. That's part of the thinking, right? I mean, maybe I would go ahead and buy an H&M on the side, but I wouldn't claim it in front of people. But okay, anyways, I think, feel free to write it on the comments. It was nice to hear from you already, Sushant, but that's what my assumption was as well. I mean, I've shown this slide multiple times. I cannot land onto a decision myself because there's just so many different factors, right? It's firstly, what is sustainable? And this is something I talk about and think about a lot of times as well. Anytime I try to make a purchase, I don't know if recycled is better than recyclable because, sure, it's recycled, but it's not going back into the planet. Is recyclable better, even if it's polyester? And then that's just the sustainable angle. Then there's the price, there's the cost, there's the color. Do I want to actually be wearing black or do I want to wear green? So many different factors. And this is, this was just one decision, me trying to make a decision, and it takes effort. And there were those so many different barriers, which just makes it tiring. It wasn't easy for me to make that decision, or any of you, I would imagine, either. And now I'm just going to do one more activity. And this one, again, think about it for yourself. If you want to write on the comments, feel free to do that. But this is just for you to reflect on. So now imagine you're deciding what you want for dinner. What do you want to cook? What would you think, or how would you feel if you're, in front of the fridge, you see what you have, and you're deciding based on that? Or now imagine, you're going back from work, you're in this crowded metro station, you need to run to the grocery store, pick up things to actually make food. How would you feel in that situation? What would you think of then? Or you're passing by your favorite restaurant, you've decided you're cooking at home, but you really get those smells of things that you like. Would that influence what you would cook or eat at home? Maybe get influenced enough to not cook and just eat at the restaurant. Or if you're sitting with friends, or if you have kids. I'm imagining in this audience we don't, but maybe you have younger siblings or just people around you who are being impatient, crying. Now you have to make a decision in that scenario. You're at work, running late, you have to go home, cook something. You're at the store, you see a saving zone. Would that influence what you would buy to cook with? Maybe you went there thinking, I'm going to make this big, I don't know, bolognese, but you see on savings, you see some corn and some other things like that. Or you're just really hungry. How would you decide if you're just really hungry? And did you, when you went through these different pictures, thinking, hopefully you put yourself in the situation, would you act the same or would you act differently? And again, I just want you to reflect on this for yourself. If you want to write on the chat, feel free. But just take 30 seconds to reflect. So my assumption was that you did think differently. If you're really hungry, you just want something really quick. If you're sitting on the weekend, you have time, you're planning for dinner, you have way more time to even think consciously. If you are trying to eat consciously, maybe you're thinking of how I can be healthy. So many different factors impact behaviors, including our context. And the context can be physical. Where are you physically? Are you in that metro station? Are you in the store? Are you at home? It can also be emotional. How are you feeling? Are you feeling happy? A lot of us are guilty of, sad munching on things or just happy munching on things. I did a good thing. I deserve something good. So all of those different factors impact our behavior, and social environment and context also being one of those, right? What do you see on social media? If I see a certain thing trending, I would want to eat that. So this is just to, pull out and say there's so many different factors influencing behaviors. And right now, I just asked you to make 2 decisions. And from research, we know that we actually make 35,000 decisions in a day, approximately, of course. And maybe when you look at that number, not all the decisions even come to mind, but small things like, what time should I wake up? How should I actually go to work? Should I open Instagram? Should I reply to people or not? All of those things are actually decisions. And think if you had to spend as much energy as you did on the last 2 decisions on all of these. You just cannot. You physically don't have that energy. We do have very limited energy to make all of these different decisions that we have every single day. And this is why we tend to take shortcuts. And this is not something we even do voluntarily. This is just how our brain tends to work, because our brain is lazy. It does not want to spend that limited energy on every single decision. So we try to find the best way to use our limited resources and try to make decisions quick, because we want things fast. And this is why, going back to the topic, we tend to be irrational, but very much predictably so. It's not like one person is there. Of course, we're all individuals, we're very different people. But when it comes to the shortcuts that we take, we tend to be very predictable in that. And there's a lot of science on this. There's a lot of research, lots of experiments, which looks at how the human brain works, how the human brain tends to be irrational, biased, try to make shortcuts and make these decisions as quickly as possible, just so we can get through our day. Otherwise, we wouldn't even get through the first half an hour of our day if we spent all that energy. And I'm just bringing up some examples of how we tend to be irrational as well. We tend to be very reluctant to change. So because there's so much to think about, we would rather be in the state that we're at. We prefer to be, if you're have you been in situations where you have a software update, for example? And you just keep snoozing it. You're like, I'll do it. I'll get to it a little bit later, even though it will be better. It will make your, say, laptop faster, your phone faster, but it just feels like effort. It's something that you have to do. I don't know if my phone will become slower because maybe last time it did, even though, the brand is telling it will be good, it will be better. We just don't like to change. It feels like it's effort. I will have a big learning curve. And that's what this image captures as well. Someone's offering this person a shovel because, well, it will be way faster for you to just use a shovel, but it feels like I'm going to have to learn how to use a shovel. I know how to use a spoon. I'll just continue doing that because it's easy. And this is one of the biases we all tend to have. And I'm sure if you reflect, you can think of some examples for yourself as well. I certainly can. We tend to not see all the information. So because there's so much information on the planet in general, and social media just makes this way, way worse, we only see the information we want to see. So if I see things which resonate with my beliefs, I'll cling on to that because it just makes sense. I've seen this before. I've heard from, a certain friend of mine, this Netflix show is really good. Although I hear from 10 other people that it's not, I'll believe that one friend of mine. Just because, I trust that person, I will go for that. So we're not rational, even when we have different sources of information, because there's just too much. We see what we want to see and what makes sense to us. So, like I said, we see what makes sense to us. Both the yogurts, as you can see in the situation, are exactly the same. It's just that the information's been put in a way that one captures our attention. And this is a very simple example to show we're not rational. If you were rational, you would go for either of them. But again, we know from experiments and research, people tend to go for the one on the right, just because it shows them, it's 80% fat-free, but the first one doesn't stand out as much. We also tend to create illusions. So again, we like to have meaning in general. We don't like when things don't make sense. They should have some sort of a story. And this is where we tend to create illusions, create stereotypes. And I'm sure, again, all of us are subject to that. We've all created stereotypes. You see someone dressed a certain way, you assume they'd be a certain way. Without knowing the person, without knowing the statistics, we make assumptions just because it makes sense. So these are just some of the ways we tend to be biased. If you are interested, there's a lot of science and a lot of reading here as well. You can reach out to me and I can tell you where to go. So in short, it's just good to remember that human beings are lazy by default. And this is, like I said before, we only have a little bit energy. We try to be as optimal as possible. We always choose the path with the least resistance, where I don't have too many barriers. This seems the simple way. I mean, just think about when you're walking outside as well. And this is where that Pythagoras theorem, where you must have learned in school, comes into play. If you see a long route and then you see a shorter route, even if you have to jump over some stones there, you might tend to take that just because it's a shortcut, it feels easier. We hate barriers and we're not always rational. And this is not an attack on anyone. I know when I started getting into this as well, I felt like, oh my God, am I really not rational? Am I, can I that easily be understood by science and research? But it's actually something once you start to get familiar with for yourself as well can be useful, but also in projects as a designer. It can really help you to understand people, humans, and not just your users. So see your users as humans. And this is why, as I said, it's our role really as designers. Maybe some of you are architects here, some of you are designers working on products, softwares, or even services. It's our role and our job to really make it easy to make sustainable choices. And I know, I've been very biased when it comes to sustainability from the start. Of course, that's the background that I come from. And I do believe that that is quite essential now. But if that is a field that you're in, and if you're not, and you're planning to be, think about how you can make it easy for people to make those choices. And how can you always design for as little effort for people and cognitive effort as well? I mean, we do as designers think a lot of how people, open doors, how they use products, but also think of the mental effort that people have to take. I'm not going to go very deep into how we do that, but in short, try to remove barriers whenever possible, make it easy for people, and try to make them motivated, make it rewarding. Why would people want to do a certain thing? How can you get people excited about that and make people do some things? And I'm just going to go through a few examples here of how this can be done, this has been done, and how you can also start to apply this in your work. Defaults are something which can really help change behaviors in whichever direction you're going. And again, going back to what I said 2 minutes ago, I did talk about changing behaviors for more positive reasons, planet positive behaviors. There's a lot of massive brands which are trying to change behaviors, not for the best reasons, but they're still changing behaviors. So you can, of course, do it for whichever direction you want to. But this is where, as designers, you need to check yourself and check your ethics as well. What are you trying to change behaviors for? Because you can. So like I said, defaults are one of the easiest ways to change behaviors because you completely remove barriers from people. So here's an example from an experiment which was done where they realized people were wasting a lot of food when they had a big plate. They would take a lot of food. You see this in buffets as well. People take a lot and they waste a lot. So just by making the default size of the plate smaller, they managed to reduce the amount of food waste that people had. Because of course you can go back and get more food, but they just made that one step harder for people so that they had to go and put more effort for the worst choice. Similarly, a lot of countries, they realized that having organ donation as something which was an opt-in. So by default, you weren't donating organs, and they saw that people weren't actually opting in for that because there was a process. You would have to go through paperwork, fill in things, and opt in for organ donation. But then some countries went ahead and changed that, and they made it default. So by default, you're born, your organs will be donated. And they saw a massive increase in how many people donated their organs just because it was the easiest choice. Now I don't have to think about it. It's already done for me. If I really don't want to, I have to put the effort to do that. And a very simple example of how, different programs now have autosaves just because they know if they don't have it, people tend to lose their data, and they can just help people by making it easy from the start. I mean, if you really don't want to, you can switch it off if you're syncing with other people, but they make the default the easiest. It's important to also think of who is the messenger. And I bring this example here because there was this big documentary on Netflix, The Game Changers, which spoke about plant-based eating. And it brought Arnold Schwarzenegger to talk about this. And I personally know so many different people who before this documentary were quite skeptical about that topic. They're like, sure, I know plant-based, yes, it's good for the environment. They saw this documentary and they switched just because they had the right messenger. They had the person that they resonated with. Maybe they were people who go to the gym too much, a lot, and it just resonated with them. So it's important to see who the messenger is. And this, again, it depends on if you're talking about physical products, services, digital, it works across all different touch points. And another example is just how can you bring similarity when you're trying to share messages. I mean, showing people, oh, we have this beautiful app, beautiful product. It's used by 50,000 people around the globe. Sure, good. It's a lot of people. But the moment people see, oh, okay, some of my friends are using that. Facebook does this a lot. You always see, friends of yours are also subscribing to this or are also liking this. It clicks it. There's a little switch which goes on because it's like, I know these people. I know their choices. And I trust that. But it can also work the other way. Maybe you don't like those people, you don't like their choices, and then you will not go for this. But again, that similarity and having the known people always tends to push you in the right direction. And how can you make things easy to try? So anytime we're asking people to change, be it, eat sustainable, be healthy, go for a run, take the bikes, it's some level of uncertainty. Sure, we're telling people, take the bike to the office. I can, but is it going to be fun? What routes do I have to take? I need to buy a bike. There's so many different things I have to think about. So how can you make it easy for people to try? And again, a lot of software brands have done this really well. You have the freemium now. You can always try for free and then opt out of it if you want. I don't know how many of you actually end up opting out. I have so many apps I've subscribed to just because I tried the freemium and stuck in, unless I actually set a reminder to get me out of that. And this can, again, how do you make it easy to try, but also get out of it? And especially when it comes to, I think, hardware products. A lot of times we make it, we have a product, you go to the shop, you buy it, full stop. It's not easy to try it unless a friend of yours has it. You go, you see, you like it, you buy it. But the trying part of it can actually help so much because you remove that uncertainty. You make it easy for people to try. The last example I have here is from Zalando, where now they have a new feature in a way in their website where every time you buy a garment from the start, they say, we will buy back your garment at the end. So they make that process simpler from the start. You don't have to, once you've bought a garment, think about what's the next life of this? Should I throw it? I mean, ideally, we shouldn't be throwing those garments and they should go somewhere. And that's what Zalando has now done. It just makes it easy from the start. A few more examples. I mean, norms. This is one of the biggest ways to change behaviors, again, positively or negatively. A very small example being the 10,000 steps. It started as something very casual, but then it became such a big thing where people started talking about it saying, oh, I've done 10,000 steps today. How many have you done? And it was just a social norm, which made people actually start walking more often just because it became that competitive thing. My friends are doing it. I want to be able to say that that's what I've done. And they managed to create a norm around it. And again, TikTok, social media, massive giants creating so many different norms around so many different things. This can go out of hand so easily, but how can we use this in the best way possible? How can we give people a choice? This is actually just one of the examples from Electrolux as well, where we really wanted to push for how can we help people be sustainable when using dishwashers? And again, we know we cannot just go ahead, tell people, be sustainable, choose eco, do this, do that, because I care, but I don't have time. But instead, how can you give people a choice? Give them that, again, every time you're choosing a program, for example, how do we make them think you are actually, the more quicker you go, the less eco you become. So every time they make that choice, we trigger them and make them think, maybe it's not the best choice. Maybe I don't need to be that quick today. So we're not enforcing, but actually asking people and giving them a choice. Get people committed. IKEA does this really well. Hopefully some of you have heard about the IKEA effect, which is basically how can you get people committed, get them invested. The more time you put into something, the more you'd actually want to stick with that. So if we're talking about, making people be more sustainable, have more sustainable behaviors, can we, how do we get them committed? Is there some goals that you can make with friends? Is there some sort of tracking? So you see gradually what you're doing and you get more and more invested into that. Because again, it's a step-by-step process. It can be really hard when the ask is so big and you're not seeing anything on the day-to-day. So how do we try to create those moments in a more immediate way? And this brings me to the last few examples, which is really how can you give people immediate benefits? So like I said, a lot of the times these asks, so, we want people, let's say you're working with the government, your goal is how can we make people eat more healthy, just because obesity rates are going through the roof. But sure, everyone knows they want to be healthy, but the benefit you're not going to get today. You might get that benefit 10 years from now or 15 years from now when you find out, oh, I don't have heart disease. Good. I'm not going to see that today. Today, it's easiest to just go ahead and eat a pizza instead because it's nice, be lazy, sit on the couch. So how can we give people those immediate benefits so you can see you're actually in the right direction? Again, Duolingo does this really well, where they give you smaller goals. It gives you smaller rewards so you feel like you're going in the right direction. Because again, learning a language can be a massive goal. It's not easy. It doesn't come in a day, but they give you those immediate benefits, small rewards. They also substitute the rewards. And instead of making you, stay in it because of the language, they make this streak. They have the streak feature. And I've seen so many people again where, they're doing this just because you want to keep on to the streak. Again, Snapchat did that as well, not for the right reasons, but they did that. But Duolingo does that to make you learn a language. And again, make people do the right thing, maybe not for the best reason as you had in mind. Similarly, another example from Copenhagen, where they saw that people were just littering around too much. Cigarette butts were all around the floor. So they thought, how can we change that and make people throw it in the bins? They had bins all around, but people weren't doing that. So they gamified that. They made it more fun. They said, who is the best football player? And they actually saw an increase in cigarette butts going from the floor into the bins. So I'm very close to the end of the talk now. There were a lot of examples of how you can do this, but I just want to summarize with saying, always think, even if you're doing a product, service, whatever you're designing, even if it's a building as an architect, we try to make the best products from our end, but do think about how the product will be used. What is the full life cycle it's going through? Because again, making the product is one small part. You can make a beautiful one. Eventually, it will be with people. And this is where you have to think about how the product will be used and guide the best usage. Because again, if you don't do that, a product is not always going to be used the way you think it will be. And this is just a funny example, but you can go ahead and find a lot more examples where you intend a certain use, but it's not used the same way because people are people. We are biased, we're irrational. And we as designers do have the impact to change that behavior because design does do that. And that's about it for this time. Thank you.
Awesome. Shreya, thank you so much. This is brilliant. Yeah, I think like within what was this 30 minutes, I think I learned a lot. I took some notes. I do have a lot of questions as well. But before that, I'm gonna ask the audience as well to use the chat box. That should be your favorite tool right now. If you have burning questions, please put that in. My job here is to just relay all of those candidly to Shreya, and then hopefully, get this discussion going. And while you guys are doing that, I can get started with a couple of things that you mentioned early on. Um, Shreya, can you speak a little bit more about user versus person and what differences that firstly, why is the industry questioning that, and secondly, what are the differences when you talk about user versus person in the process?
Yeah, I think that's a question which I started thinking about myself last year quite a bit, and I don't think I have a conclusion on that for myself. I remember I also visited. There was a conference last year here called Business to Buttons, and a similar conversation was going on there, where we said, the more we see people as users, we tend to disassociate. And I see that happening a lot of times. I mean, even in my company, it's, we say, oh, this is our user, this is what they do. If we give them 10 programs, of course they'll use it, because our user in Electrolux is a conscious explorer. And I think the moment we say user, conscious explorer, we know they want to be sustainable, and they will be sustainable because this is how we've segmented them. And we completely disassociate, and we don't think, would you do that? If I gave you 10 different programs on a washing machine, and sorry for my examples, they go back to my company, but if I give you 10 different programs, you're not going to care, right? And I think the moment we say user, we forget about that, because we've created this persona and we stick to that. But then on the other hand, and this was an interesting argument that I heard against that, was if we don't say user and we only say person, everyone's a person. Then are we specifically talking about that user group, or who are we talking about? So I think it's a very interesting conversation which is starting. Of course, it's a small conversation, but I think it does impact a lot, especially when you think beyond design. Because eventually, if you're in a company or even in a consultancy, you're not just working with designers, you're working with marketing people, R&D. And I think in those places as well, people tend to forget that user is a person. And they just tend to think, this is the user, they will do this. No, they will not. They are people. So I think, like I said, I don't have a conclusion there. It's an ongoing conversation, which we just need to be conscious about. I think it's majorly just to be conscious that you're not designing for a user, you're designing for a person who's a user.
I think what is interesting about that is, and something that I question myself is, do you design for the expected user behavior, in the sense, do you design for supporting the behavior that they have today, or do designers have the power to sort of design a future world where you can influence these people to move in the right direction? Because there's two things, right? A is like, you support their behaviors, you kind of see them trying to do something. For example, if you're having pizza, I'll make it easier to get a pizza delivered to your home, versus having the power. How and when does a designer decide which role to take?
That's and I think I'd be a little bit biased here, to be honest, because like I said, I only started to get more and more conscious for I think since the time I came to Sweden, just because it's a big conversation and that's what the direction tends to be. Again, at the end of the day, yes, we do need to make today life easier as well, but actively we do need to be trying to go towards that vision of what we need to be done. And again, this is very driven from, there are certain things that we need to be done for the planet now. I mean, we're in this situation where and maybe I'm a little bit too pessimistic about this as well, where it's just, we've messed up the world quite bad. And waiting, if we continuously only if we keep making it easy for people to just get the pizza today and we're not thinking about that, it's going to be too late. And that's why I think, of course, we need both. And this is where, if we can try to combine the two as well, I mean, of course, people are still going to want their pizzas. I want my pizzas as well. But can we make them get it in the best way possible, make it a little bit lesser? So one of the big things, and that's what I showed you, one of the examples, the Gru Kitchen, that one really worked on sustainable eating. That was the biggest goal for the project. And there it becomes tricky, right? It's like, we want people to eat lesser meat. We want people to eat more plant-based. So we are still doing products which will make people are still cooking their meats and things like that. But how can we actively keep trying to push people from that a little bit? Because that has to be done today. So I think the choice is as conscious as you can be, the better it is. And I think in today's day, if you can't bring that consciousness into the company or your consultancy, wherever you work as well, I mean, as a designer, it's our job to do that as well. A lot of times we're restricted by the projects that we work with. If you have a project where you have to improve today's experience, yes, then it's down to where do you want to work? What drives you? And we need both, but yeah, I guess
Awesome.
we need both.
No, that's super interesting. A lot of questions are popping up. I'm gonna finish up with mine, which is more a personal question in the sense that since you are deep into this field, do you feel there is a pressure to always make the right choice? How do you differentiate yourself from being a user yourself or a human, a person yourself and a designer? Do you constantly make your decisions because you have the knowledge of where the world is going and bigger trends, bigger impacts on the planet than, let's say, a typical consumer who doesn't look at the label and read how much impact it has on the world?
To be honest, even though I have a lot more information, like again, every day we're talking about this topic and we're working across many different appliances in the home. So we talk about many different spaces in the home in general. And I try as much as possible to be conscious. But a lot of times, again, at the end of the day, I am a person as well, right? So is everyone. And I don't think I am as far as the big activists out there who are really trying intensively to change their behavior. So wherever I can, I can. Wherever I can, I do. But I know a lot of times where it's like, okay, I need to run the dishwasher. I need these dishes done quickly. Or if I'm at the washing machine, I'm like, I know I should make the best choices, choose the right temperatures. Okay, temperature, I understand now, but put the right detergent. I don't understand if I'm not being guided. And I think that's what brings me back to the talk where it's like, if we're not going to guide people, we can't expect it from people because it's just hard. And again, washing is a very small part of my entire life. Buying a garment is a very small part of the entire life, right? So if it's just easier, if it's cheaper for me to do a certain thing, I will just do that. And again, I think it always leaves me in a massive guilt loop as well, where I'm just like, I know I want to, but at the end of the day, can I spend like 5,000 on a certain thing versus spending 500? And I don't know what currency I'm speaking now, but it's like, yeah, I mean, you can be till the time it's not easy. And of course, this is where people do have to change. We do need a big change from governments and brands. And I know brands are starting to do a lot because you as people just cannot do everything. But that doesn't mean we can't do anything.
Awesome. There's a lot of questions stemming from exactly what you said. Specifically, you mentioned as people, there's tons of decisions you're making, right? Let's talk about decisions in your professional setting, because I would imagine those are slightly lesser than your whole life. There's two questions on that. One is, are there any challenges you face on changing behaviors of companies internally, especially maybe at Electrolux, or maybe when you, talk about your role to other people? How would you advise someone to navigate talking about sustainability as well as making those decisions in the process in a larger organization and bring about a change, in like a team versus focusing on the users? Or maybe again, the question is that a part of it as well? Because you focus on user and persons, sustainability becomes part of the process? Or does it start inside out first, in the sense that we as a company should be sustainable and so on?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, I don't know if I fully grasp it. I'll try to answer it in a certain way, and then you tell me if I grasp, I answered right. I think definitely, again, back to my bias. The company for sure is very driven by sustainability, is what I would say, Electrolux. And that is where it starts. Like our biggest conversation on this started when we realized that a massive part of the impact of our products actually comes from the use phase. So, we're actively trying using the best materials, making them as efficient as possible. But the biggest lifetime, that especially white goods, these massive goods that you buy for a high price, they stay in your house for 8 to 10 years, ideally. A massive impact comes from that. And that's how we actively started talking about that. But also a little bit, and that's what I push for most often as well, which is outside in. that yes, we're all doing certain things, and it's very easy to get lost in just that day-to-day work. But the moment you step out and you look outside in, this is what we're doing, but what is the bigger impact of this? And you look, okay, you still want to do the product, but can we look also what is it that our planet needs, our climate needs, and then try to match them? Because again, no one, at the end of the day, you have to make money, and I think that's what comes down to it in the business as well. It's like, yeah, we can try to change behaviors. We say, if we change behaviors drastically, maybe we don't even want people to use certain of our products. We're not going to be bold. We're not going to do that, of course. We can't just say don't use the product, but how do we make it as the best use scenario as possible? Did I kind of answer that? I mean, yeah, in short, I think it's both ways. It's not just design. I see it's a very growing conversation in other fields, but designers do have to actively push for that as well. I think marketing, again, has a massive role here. Because again, in marketing, we see we can beautify, sell things in a certain way, people will go for that. But that's one of the biggest places for influencing behaviors. Because it's, if people don't even buy the best product that you have, lost opportunity.
Yeah, can we dive a bit deeper into your role at Electrolux and the process and how sustainability and this sort of thinking comes into play?
Yes. So, like I said, my role is a little bit fluffy, but I usually work with different projects. So we have a lot of different products, a lot of different categories in general. So how it usually works is, and again, because this is already driven by sustainability, we have massive targets when it comes to 2030, where we say we want to reduce our impact drastically. And then you start looking at, if we want to do that, what is it that we need to change? And I think that's where the outside in comes, where you start looking at, this is what we need from the planet in our certain category. So for example, if we're doing food, we're making food appliances, taste appliances. What is it that the planet needs from us? Which means, ideally, we want people to be eating lesser meat. We want people, when they're using the ovens, use it in, preheat lesser. Don't leave your oven doors open. So small things like that as well. It can be very wide or it can be very small. So we start a little bit from that angle that, okay, we know, for example, now I moved from taste into washing machines, for example. We know people should be washing at 30 degrees. Because here in Europe, we have degrees, we have temperatures. We know ideally people should do 30 degrees. Then we go into investigating what is it that people are doing. So research is a big part of what I do as well. So just, it could be observations, it could be understanding what people are doing, interviews. So getting an understanding of today, having an understanding from science of what has to be done. And then you have the opportunities for design, right? Because you see what people are doing, you see what has to be done. There's those massive barriers as to why people are not doing it. It could be they don't have the information, they don't have the time in life. I don't have the time to think about 60 degrees. I don't even know the difference between 60 and 50. So you get an understanding of what people are doing, and then you explore. And that's what we as designers are very good at doing, right? You explore solutions, you go out there, we test. And that is, I say you, but that is usually how I work as well. So it's taking the science, taking today's understanding and trying to bring them closer. And then a lot of research is involved, a lot of exploration. And usually as an experienced designer, I explore ideas, explore opportunities, and then I work closely with designers who take it forward. So I'm not so much on the execution part anymore. That's what I pulled myself away from, because I enjoyed more this holistic work. And then, it's just making sure that those come true. And then, that's how it goes forward.
Perfect. Thanks for answering that. I have another question right after this, which might be in a different tangent. And while you're answering that, I'm going to fix my blind situation because I look like, I don't know what. So the question is from Astor. He asks, I'm a graphic designer. How would you suggest I translate the principles that you talked about successfully in his work, which is more intangible, sometimes digital, and sometimes, pertaining to the graphic design industry?
Mm-hmm. I think graphic design has such a massive role to play, to be honest. It really depends on where you're applying it. If you're applying it with marketing, if you're applying it on products. Again, graphics are everywhere, so it's a bit hard for me to answer to just that. But I think it's a massive role, right? Because again, that statement of we usually, I'm going to say it wrong now, but don't judge a book by its cover. because we tend to do that, right? We're so biased by what we see. I do that all the time. Anytime I'm buying books, if it looks nice, it's nice. Is that a rational decision? No. So, I have to actively push myself, go on Goodreads, check out what is it about? Is it actually something I will like? So again, my example might be a little bit off topic, but I think graphic has a huge role. So I think it depends on what are you working on. Even small words, small placements make such a big difference. Go on to apps and websites and see just the way they pop information changes your behavior. That's what Facebook does. That's what Instagram does. They started really popping reels through it, changed our behavior. And I noticed, now I barely scroll down. I always scroll sideways because they did that. And it's not just graphic, it's interaction, but it's all embedded together as well. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Do you think it's more the impact of the graphic design rather than in the process itself? Like maybe it's not the tools that they use that they can change, but more so like how are they influencing, or like what is an ethical way of, I guess, information hierarchy, the content being displayed and so on?
I think it's, as you said, it's the information hierarchy. It's about I think the biggest part that I take from this myself also is just the consciousness of understanding that this is how people will be biased. A lot of times we do things as designers, we say, we're going to put it out there, we're going to test it, see how it's going to go. I believe this is going to work. Can we try to tap into science? I think we don't tap into science as heavily as we should, where there's experiments which show, if you will place it here versus here. I mean, it goes back to that example of the yogurt, right? Where 80% fat-free versus 20. That's a marketing tactic which is used everywhere. So it's consciousness of those tactics, which kind of feeds into the process a little bit and the tools that you use. And again, the physical tools, everything is the same. It's just about, understanding what influences the behavior. If you understand that, the messenger, like I said, I think that's an interesting one as well. If you're making some graphic tool, if you're making a poster, whose face should be there? Whose voice should be there? Should you pop a certain information more than the other? All of those things, I think it's very embedded in the process as well.
Perfect. Talk about cultural behaviors as well. Do you feel sustainability might challenge a few cultural beliefs?
Definitely. I mean, those are the barriers, to be honest. Like, those are massive barriers. And this is what I feel like me, myself, I'm so biased being here. Like when I'm in Sweden, I feel like I'm in this little bubble where it feels like it's easier. The moment I go back to India, I feel those cultural differences as well. Not just cultural, just regional differences. You go back to India, we're used to doing certain things a certain way. Here, it's completely different. I just visited the States, and there I just felt like it was completely different. People's goes back to contexts. They're completely different. So I think, again, this is it. It challenges it, but I think those are the barriers which we need to try to design around. I mean, the more conscious we are that this is people's barrier, we know, they are affected by what's happening around them. If I'm in India, I know if all my friends around me are eating meat, for example, or, that's how, and that is one of the examples. Like now I don't really eat meat. When I go back to India, I see it's happening a lot because it's just the norm. It is what's happening. So if I need to change the behavior in India versus if I need to do it here, it will be very differently. But I don't think we should see it as it challenging the norms, more as how can we design around it? Because that is our pain point, right? That's what we're very used to doing as designers, getting over that and trying to how do we solve that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you find that a little bit of a strength as well? Because you have a multicultural background, it's easier for you to break out of that bubble and firstly recognize that what you're surrounded with is a behavior that's already mature and appreciative of these decisions versus you coming from, let's say, a culture that's very varied, and second, maybe not as easily welcoming for these newer changes.
I think it's definitely very helpful to have the perspectives. I think what also helps is in Electrolux, it's a global company. So we're designing not just for Europe, but also US, Asia, and like South America. Brazil has a big market as well. I mean, it's based across everywhere. And now we're working more and more globally. So I think that's where it helps to have a slightly Indian perspective as well, because again, it can feel, and sometimes it can be funny as well, solutions we think of sitting here, again, because it's such a different culture. Labor is very cheap in India. So sometimes the solutions here tend to be, what if we can have some sort of food carts, which could bring local produce to you. And then I think from an Indian perspective, I'm like, I have that on every single corner, right? So it's interesting to see that, I think, and it's always nice the more perspectives you can bring, so that anytime you're in a project, we say, this could really work here, and then you're like, not really, not if we're trying to do a global project. I know in India it's not going to work this way. So I think, of course, the more perspectives you have, the better it is, always.
This is awesome. Firstly, I just want to thank you as well as the audience for sticking around and answering and asking so many questions. There's also like a parallel discussion happening where people are sharing their experience in this world, what resources they've used. Aromal, for example, has just posted, I guess it's a toolkit, in the field of behavioral economics that they've used in their work. I will have bandwidth for 2 to 3 more questions. We might be over time a little bit, but thanks for sticking around, everybody. Shreya is also on Discord, and post this chat. Shreya, are you okay with people reaching out to you on LinkedIn, or is yeah, cool.
LinkedIn, Instagram, 2 places. Always
okay, perfect. So, couple of the questions. One which I found interesting is, it's not really posed as a question. It kind of is. How does sustainability impact business in the sense, let's take the example of the clothes choices that you mentioned. And again, through your experience, do you find that when companies consciously try to propagate, let's say, a behavior change or a sustainable sort of, campaign, does that impact profits? Is that a conscious decision that, yes, it will be challenged? Maybe not everybody is going to feel the same way about the actual conscious decisions that have been taken in the process. I think, let me actually take a step back and rephrase the question so it's easy to answer. One, when you are in the process of designing something, how important is business and profitability?
Mm-hmm.
And second, how important, is that more important than the message?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's, again, a good question. Profit is always a big part of it. I mean, I feel like the biggest barrier of going into the industry as well as this, naive designer from college is, we have to make money. And it can always be such a conflicting thing where you're just like, I want to do good for the planet and people, but you have to make money. I mean, if you want to keep your job at the end of the day, you want to have some way of making money. But I think, again, in today's date, sustainability is not against profitability. That's my understanding, at least, because at least if you see the consumers, and here I say consumers, people who are buying the products, depending on your brand as well, are looking for that. And again, people can tend to be easily greenwashed as well, although now they're becoming very aware of that also. So you can't just stop at messaging anymore. But I think it's two-sided. I don't think it goes against profitability, but we do have to keep that as a big part of the process. And this is where we also start to look at new business models. I think that's a big conversation now, that if you want sustainability to be profitable, you might not be able to do business the same way as you were doing before. And this is why you're seeing a lot of new services coming up, a lot more rental models. When going back to the example of clothes as well, there's so many new services where they're talking about people will still want the clothes. It's a social thing, right? You're going to buy clothes. I'm not going to wear exactly the same clothes every day. We still want to make money. So they started with rental services. Right now, people are still getting their clothes. They're not owning them. You get them for a few days. You get them for a month, usually. Give them back. They take care of it. And then, you get new clothes. So in a way, you did both, right? You brought people and the planet together. And this is where I think that looking at it from both sides, not letting go of the fact that people still want a certain thing. You still want to make money. How can you bring them together? I think there's massive opportunities there. So that's where I think, yes, it's opening up new opportunities. But then on the other hand, we are always conscious of because now there's been an overdose of sustainability, right? And this goes back to greenwashing, where I can just go out there, put a stamp and say sustainable, sustainable. I mean, anytime I started looking into that, so again, with H&M as well, they have, their conscious range and things like that. When I started to actually open the tags, I was like, 20% recycled. Is that really a conscious choice? I don't know. So I think it's also, even when we're doing something which is sustainable, we know that not always can the messaging be sustainable, especially in certain factors where people might have things that matter to them more. So, if we're talking about even clothes, for example, we're saying, or let's say clothes, but we're saying, you should buy this garment. This is the most sustainable. Cost matters. So how can you try to, and that example of making people do the right thing for the wrong reason. So a lot of times we have to change the messaging from sustainability into things which will matter to people. And that is, again, a very good opportunity, right? So do we need to be saying this is more sustainable, this will save the planet? Can we say this will save you time? Because we know people care about that, but we know at the same time it is sustainable. So again, I think there's many different ways of approaching it. It really depends. I think the business is very open. At least I'm speaking for Electrolux at this point, because it's such a big drive. It's very open, but we are also conscious that if it feels like this is not going to sell, then you change the messaging, but still trying to drive it for the right thing. And there's massive opportunities as well of how you do business.
Perfect. A couple more questions, more, I guess, personal in this case. One is asked by Yaman. He says, knowing what you know as a person and designer today, what would be that one piece of advice you would give yourself when you were starting out in the industry?
That's a very interesting question. I think I think it's so tricky when you're starting out in the industry, right? I ended up here by chance in a way. I just chose Electrolux because, it worked out to be, I was there, and now I'm driven for a certain reason. I think, what advice would I give? I would really say, in today's date, be very conscious of the purpose that you have. Because I feel like, and this is me, like this is what I would tell myself. When I started off in design, it was industrial design. We learned how to make products. We learned how to make products well, make it nice. And that was the drive. Few years in the industry, now I question, I cannot just go out and make another product. There's just so much out there. So can you question your intentions? Like, this is what I would have told myself, that do it for a purpose. Look at the bigger purpose of what is happening, because I don't think I used to back then. It was just about learning what to do, making products, make the experience nice, which is very important, but think of the impact. And I think in today's day, if we just introduce a new product or a new service which is not having a positive impact, you need to question choices. And like I said, I can be very pessimistic again. I think it comes from that direction. I feel like it's our duty to think of that. And I think that's what I would tell myself, at least. Think beyond that one tiny product that you do.
Perfect. Speaking of beyond, final question. What are you looking forward to? Where is your life headed? Tell us more about, you've done first 5 years of your career. You learned so much. Firstly, thanks for sharing that information. I guess what I'm interested in, and what we all are interested in, is, what do the next 5 years look like?
If we have an existence in place. But more optimistically, to be honest, I like the place that I'm in at the moment. Like I said, again, it's very easy to try to work positively for the planet, being in a company which really cares about it. I think that's what makes me happy. At least it's in the same direction that I want to be. I think where I would really want to move towards is bigger change or social change. More environmental change, but at a bigger level. Because again, we can change behaviors through small products, but I think there's massive behavior change needed on a higher level. And that needs to come through possibly policies, governments, and things like that. So in my idealistic scenario in my head, I think that's the direction that I definitely see myself going in. And it's been a gradual shift towards that, right? Going from industrial into experience, into strategy, a lot with behavior design. Yeah, that would be my ideal place to be if I can, work with a place where you have much bigger influence. I mean, there's influence at every level. But yeah, if I can change policies.
Awesome. That's great. I've interacted with a few people who are in the policy business that tell me that it's not the most exciting process, but it's the most rewarding outcome and the impact. But that's exciting. Great. Thanks everybody, and thanks Shreya for spending your day, night, evening, because you guys are tuning in from everywhere with us. Certainly early morning here, you saw the effects of the sun. It's just right in front, like the blinds are down, but anyway. Thanks everybody for tuning in to this episode of Design Dialogue. Thanks Shreya for keeping the conversation going. Use Discord. You can tag Shreya and ask questions. Use LinkedIn to find Shreya. And keep the conversation going. That's what we do at YDI. And have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
And if I can just add one thing,
sure.
if you do reach out on Instagram, because I saw some people did, just write a message, because it's just, it's easier to see, why you want to connect and things like that. Otherwise, it might go ignored. So yeah, LinkedIn, Instagram, and I guess if I have to be on Discord.
Please.
But yeah, thanks so much for being so active. And I will go through the questions later if I have access.
Cheers, guys. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.